I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I can't shake the feeling that if I don't tell someone, I'll eventually lose my mind. I've carried this weight for years, and every night when I close my eyes, I still hear the water dripping. I still see the glass. I still see what was on the other side. This happened during a field trip in 8th grade. Our class was supposed to visit the state aquarium, which at the time had been shut down for renovations. It was a weird choice for a trip, but our science teacher, Mrs. Barrett, had special permission from the city to give us a behind-the-scenes look. She claimed it would be educational. Honestly, everyone thought it was just going to be a boring day looking at empty tanks. I was wrong. We pulled up in the bus around 10 in the morning. The place looked dead. The parking lot was cracked, weeds pushing through the pavement. The giant mural of dolphins painted on the side of the building was faded, chipped, like the creatures were peeling away from the concrete. Most of the letters on the big aquarium sign were burned out, so it just read AIU. The front doors were chained shut, but a city worker in a reflective vest met us out front. He unlocked a side entrance, told Mrs. Barrett something I couldn't hear, then handed her a heavy keyring before walking off without looking back. Inside, the air was damp and stale. You know how basements smell? Multiply that by 10. The floor tiles were cracked, some missing entirely, and puddles of stagnant water glistened in the flickering overhead lights. Everyone immediately started joking, shoving each other, daring someone to scream like a ghost. But under all the laughter, I could tell people were unsettled. Even Tyler, the class clown, kept his voice lower than usual. Mrs. Barrett led us past the empty ticket booths and into the main hall. I'd been there once before as a kid, back when the place was alive. I remembered it being bright, filled with families, the hum of water pumps and chatter bouncing off the glass tanks. Now it was silent. Most of the big tanks were drained. The glass was streaked with mineral stains and the steel frames were rusting. A few tanks still had a little water sloshing in the bottom, reflecting the lights like dull mirrors. That's when I noticed something strange. The tanks that still held water weren't empty. Shapes drifted in the murk, not fish, not anything I recognized, just vague, shifting shadows that slipped deeper into the darkness whenever I tried to focus. Don't get too close to the glass, Mrs. Barrett warned us, her voice sharp. Some of these structures aren't stable. But of course no one listened. We moved into the jellyfish wing. The tanks there still glowed faintly, lit from the inside by dying bulbs. But instead of jellyfish, the water was filled with translucent strands floating slowly, curling in unnatural ways. One brushed against the glass, and I swear I saw it twitch like a hand closing into a fist. Cool, Tyler whispered, but his grin looked forced. The deeper we went, the worse it got. The shark tunnel, one of those glass tubes you walk through while fish swim over your head, was dark. The water above us was cloudy, swirling with debris. I pressed my face up, squinting, trying to see if anything was alive in there. That's when something huge brushed against the glass. The whole tunnel shuddered. Everyone screamed and backed up. Mrs. Barrett yelled at us to calm down, insisting it was just leftover debris shifting in the water. But even she looked pale. I remember clinging to the railing, staring up into that swirling water. For a split second, I thought I saw an eye staring back. Enormous, too close. We hurried out of the tunnel. After that, things got worse. Kids started saying they felt sick. A couple complained of ringing in their ears. One girl swore she saw someone walking behind us in the reflection of the tanks, but when she turned, no one was there. Then the lights went out, just snap, total darkness. We all screamed. I grabbed Tyler's arm, heart pounding. The only light came from the faint glow of a few tanks casting rippling shadows on the walls. Stay calm. Mrs. Barrett's voice cut through the panic, but it shook like she wasn't convinced herself. That's when we heard it. A sound that wasn't ours. Dripping, slow, steady, too loud, like it was echoing inside the glass itself. Then came another noise, something heavy scraping along the floor, somewhere ahead of us. Mrs. Barrett fumbled with a flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, shaking as her hand trembled. In the light, we saw wet footprints. Bare feet, leading deeper into the aquarium. Everyone back on the bus, she snapped. But none of us wanted to move. The footprints weren't just wet, they were fresh. I could see droplets still forming, running into each other. And they weren't normal prints either. They were long, too long, Like the feet had extra joints, the toes stretched out unnaturally far. Something splashed behind the glass. The kids bolted. Chaos. Screaming. Shoving. I should have followed, but for some reason I froze. My eyes locked on one of the nearby tanks. At first, it looked empty. Just dark water. Then something pressed against the glass, not a hand. Not a fish. Something in between. The skin was pale, rubbery. The fingers were too long, bending backward against the glass like seaweed caught in a current. And behind them, a face drifted into view. It looked human. Almost. The eyes were pale, cloudy, like they'd been underwater too long. The mouth opened and closed slowly, releasing a stream of bubbles that slid up the inside of the glass. I stumbled back, slamming into Tyler. He pulled me along, yelling at me to move. We ran. Through the empty halls, past drained tanks, the sound of footsteps behind us. Slapping, wet, dragging. At one point, I swear I felt cold water splash against the back of my legs, though the floor was dry. We didn't stop until we burst out the side entrance into the sunlight. The city worker was gone. The bus driver looked confused as kids screamed to open the doors. Mrs. Barrett did a head count once we were inside. Her hands were shaking. 29, she muttered. Where's Kevin? Everyone went silent. Kevin was gone. They searched the aquarium for hours. The police came. Dogs, flashlights, everything. No trace. The official story was that Kevin slipped away, ran off somewhere in the city. His parents never believed it. Neither did we, because later that night, a few of us got a text from his number, a blurry photo of glass, water pressed up against it, and something pale, with two long fingers drifting just behind him. The text just said, "Don't tap the glass." I didn't believe in curses before this, or haunted places, or the idea that something as ordinary as a school bus could hold a secret so terrifying that it still follows me every time I hear the squeal of brakes. But what happened during my sophomore year changed everything. It was supposed to be one of those harmless, boring field trips, the kind you forget the second you get home. Our English teacher, Mr. Foster, arranged for the class to see a play at a small community theater in a neighboring town. We were supposed to leave at 8 a.m. sharp, take the bus, watch the show, grab lunch, and be back before the last bell. Easy. That morning started out normal. Kids joked around in the parking lot, trading snacks before we boarded. The bus driver wasn't the usual guy. It was a substitute, someone none of us recognized. He was tall, thin, with a face that looked too pale for someone who worked outside. His eyes were hidden behind aviator sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. He didn't say a word when we got on, just nodded stiffly, like he wasn't happy to be there. I remember pausing at the door, my backpack hanging off one shoulder. Something about him made me hesitate. But then Tyler shoved me from behind, laughing. "Move it, man. We're not getting assigned seats." So I went in, sat near the middle, next to the window. The engine groaned to life and the bus lurched forward. That was when I noticed something odd. The route. The theater was only 45 minutes away, straight down the highway. But after 20 minutes, I realized we weren't on the highway at all. Instead, we were rattling down narrow back roads lined with skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the sky. Foster? Someone called from the front. "Where are we going?" Mr. Foster frowned, then leaned toward the driver. Their voices were low, but I heard enough. "This isn't the route," Foster said. The driver didn't answer. "Sir, the turnoff was 5 miles back." The driver's hand shot up, palm out. Not a word, just that gesture, stiff and final. Foster sat back, his face pale. The bus grew quiet. We kept driving. The further we went, the more the road seemed wrong. The trees leaned closer, their trunks warped, roots breaking through the asphalt. The yellow lines down the middle faded until they vanished completely. My stomach twisted. I glanced at the other kids. Everyone was whispering now, eyes darting nervously. Finally, Tyler, always the one to push, stood up. "Hey man, where are we going?" he called to the driver. "This ain't funny." The driver didn't respond. He didn't even twitch. That's when I noticed his hands. They weren't moving. The wheel turned on its own, the bus swaying smoothly through each curve. His fingers were clamped tight around the steering wheel, knuckles bone white, but they didn't shift. Not an inch. The bus was steering itself. Tyler sat down hard. Nobody said another word. The road narrowed further until it was barely wide enough for the bus. The trees on either side formed a tunnel, branches tangling overhead to blot out the gray sky. The headlights flickered on automatically, casting long beams through the mist that had begun to creep along the ground. I glanced at my phone. No service. Of course. Stay calm, everyone. Mr. Foster tried to reassure us, but his voice cracked. That was when the smell hit. Rot, damp earth, and mildew mixed with something metallic. It seeped in through the vents, thick enough to taste. A few kids gagged. One girl started crying softly. I pressed my sleeve against my face and peered out the window. Shapes moved between the trees. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Shadows, maybe. But no, there were figures out there. Tall, thin. They moved in jerks like their limbs didn't bend right. And their heads. Their heads were too smooth, like someone had stretched skin over a balloon. One of them turned toward the bus, and even through the fog I saw its mouth open, too wide. No sound came out. The bus rattled on. We must have driven for an hour, maybe more. Time felt broken. My watch hands froze at 9:17 and wouldn't move again. At some point we passed a rusted road sign. The letters were so corroded they were unreadable, but something had scratched words into the metal. The road owns you now. Kids began to panic openly. Some shouted at Foster to make the driver stop. Others pounded on the windows, though none of the shapes outside reacted. Finally, Foster snapped. He stormed up the aisle, grabbed the driver's shoulder, and yanked. The driver's sunglasses slipped off. His eyes weren't eyes, they were mirrors. Perfectly smooth, reflecting Foster's horrified face back at him. The driver smiled. I swear his teeth were too many, too sharp. Foster stumbled back, tripping over a seat. The bus lurched violently, tossing us sideways. The kids screamed. The shapes outside pressed closer to the tree line like they were waiting. "Sit down," the driver finally barked, his voice deep and hollow, like it came from underground. No one moved. That's when the bus doors hissed open. The air that rushed in was freezing, stinking of wet leaves and decay. And in that moment I realized the bus wasn't stopping. It never would. The only way off was through those doors. The first kid who bolted didn't even make it to the ground. One of the figures outside moved faster than I thought possible. Long arms, jointless, snapped forward, pulling the kid into the fog. His scream cut off instantly. The doors slammed shut. Silence. We sat frozen, too terrified to breathe. The driver's grin stretched wider and the bus groaned as it picked up speed. I don't remember the next part clearly. Everything blurred. The sound of the engine roaring, the fog swallowing the windows, the kids sobbing around me. I remember clutching the seat so hard my nails split. Then, light. Suddenly the trees parted. The bus jerked violently and skidded onto familiar pavement. We were back on the highway. The theater sign glowed ahead, bright and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. The driver pulled into the parking lot, put the bus in park, and stood without a word. He walked down the aisle, his mirrored eyes sweeping over us. We shrank back in our seats. At the door, he paused. His grin returned. "Don't be late getting back," he said. His voice was lighter now, almost cheerful. Then he stepped off the bus and vanished into the crowd outside the theater. Foster herded us out, his face pale as chalk. He kept glancing around like he expected the driver to reappear. We never saw him again. The play went on. Teachers pretended everything was normal. Kids whispered about what we'd seen, but no one dared speak too loud. When the return bus arrived that afternoon, it was driven by the regular guy, Rick, who joked about traffic and played the radio like always. Everyone breathed easier, but not me, because I sat near the back by the window, and halfway home I saw it, in the reflection of the glass, not my own face, but his, grinning, the mirrored eyes gleaming back at me. When I was in 8th grade, our class took a field trip to the City History Museum. It wasn't a flashy place. No dinosaur bones or giant spacecraft like the science museums had. This one was older, quieter, filled with Civil War relics, dusty paintings, and mannequins dressed in antique clothing. At the time, I wasn't thrilled about it. The museum had a reputation among kids in town. Not for being haunted exactly, but for being strange. People whispered about getting lost in the hallways, about exhibits changing places overnight, about shadows that didn't match the people casting them. I figured it was just rumors, but now I know better. We got there around 9:30 a.m., filing into the main lobby where marble floors echoed our footsteps and a giant mural of the city's founding stretched across the wall. The staff split us into 2 groups. My group went with Mrs. Harris, our history teacher, while the others went upstairs with Mr. Clark. For the first hour, it was harmless. We shuffled past glass cases full of rusted muskets and yellowed letters. Mrs. Harris rattled off facts in her cheerful teacher voice. The room smelled faintly of polish and mildew. Then we reached the basement. The staircase down was narrow and steep, the kind of stairs that made you dizzy if you looked straight down. Mrs. Harris told us the basement held special archives the public rarely got to see. That perked us up a little. Finally, something different. The air changed as soon as we descended. It was colder, heavier, like the oxygen itself had been drained out. The lighting was dim, the bulbs flickering overhead. Long concrete hallways stretched ahead, lined with doors. The first room held mannequins, not the glossy store kind, but old, cracked figures with glass eyes that seemed too real. They wore tattered clothing from the 1800s, bonnets, waistcoats, dresses that looked like they'd rot if you touched them. Their hands were posed in odd ways, some reaching outward, some folded as if in prayer. Tyler, of course, had to mess with them. He waved his hand in front of one mannequin's face, whispering, "Blink if you're alive." We laughed nervously, but Mrs. Harris quickly shushed him. The next rooms were worse. One was filled with taxidermy animals, their glass eyes following us. Another had rows of wax heads, just heads arranged on shelves like library books. Their expressions were twisted in mid-scream or frozen smiles. By the third room, some of us were hanging back, uneasy. I remember whispering to my friend Sarah, "Why would they even keep this stuff?" She just shrugged, clutching her backpack straps tighter. Then we reached the locked door. It was at the end of a side corridor, different from the others. Heavy iron with a tarnished padlock hanging from it. Someone had scratched letters into the metal. "Not for children." Mrs. Harris chuckled awkwardly. "Well, we won't be going in there." But Tyler grinned. When Mrs. Harris turned to lead us back, Tyler slipped something from his pocket. A bobby pin, I think, and started fiddling with the lock. I hissed at him to stop, but he just winked. The padlock clicked open. Before I could say anything, he swung the door wide. The smell hit us first. Damp earth, mold, something faintly metallic. Beyond the threshold was a stairwell spiraling down into complete darkness. "Tyler," Mrs. Harris snapped. "Close that right now!" But he was already halfway through the doorway. A few kids followed, giggling nervously. I don't know why I went too. Maybe curiosity, maybe peer pressure. But I followed him down those stairs. The deeper we went, the colder it got. My breath came out in white puffs. The concrete walls wept moisture, and the only light came from our phones. At the bottom was a hallway. Narrow, long. The floor was dirt instead of concrete. Packed down by countless footsteps. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered beside me. Nobody answered. We walked slowly, our footsteps muffled in the dirt. The hallway ended at a wooden door, ancient and cracked. Tyler shoved it open. Inside was a massive chamber. I'll never forget what it looked like. The ceiling arched high above us, dripping with stalactites. The walls were lined with shelves, rows and rows of jars, each filled with cloudy liquid. And floating in those jars were things, hands, eyes, chunks of pale flesh. Some looked human. Some didn't, Sarah gagged. Someone whimpered. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it lay a mannequin, or what I thought was a mannequin. Its skin was waxy, grayish. Its chest had been cut open and stitched back together crudely. As we edged closer, its glassy eyes rolled toward us. We screamed. The thing sat up with a wet crack, its stitched chest heaving. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out, only a rush of air that stank of rot. We bolted, kids shoved past each other, scrambling for the door. Tyler dropped his phone in the dirt and didn't stop to pick it up. I was near the back. As I glanced over my shoulder, I saw them. Figures stepping out from between the shelves. Dozens of them, mannequins, wax heads, taxidermy animals. All moving, all watching. One mannequin tilted its head, its jaw unhinging until it cracked open wider than it should. Another reached out, its wooden fingers bending backward as it clawed the air. I sprinted up the stairs, 2 at a time. At the top, Mrs. Harris was screaming at us, trying to count heads, but kids were shoving past her. The iron door slammed shut behind us with a sound like thunder. She locked it fast, face pale, lips trembling. "You weren't supposed to go down there," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to see it." Nobody answered. The rest of the trip passed in a blur. None of us could focus on the exhibits upstairs. By the time we got back to school, everyone was silent, shaken. Tyler swore us to secrecy, saying nobody would believe us anyway. But that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. I opened it. It was a picture. Blurry. Dark. Dirt floor. And in the corner, barely visible, my own dropped phone lying in the underground hallway. The message below read, "We'll keep it safe until you come back." I threw my phone across the room. But even now, years later, sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I hear it, the faint sound of glass tapping, like fingernails on a jar, waiting.